Well, good morning, Salem. Yeah, what a beautiful day and a beautiful weekend, and just grateful to be able to be here. There's something about the lights, there's something about the music, there's something about this time of year. I have the privilege of having my good friend Rob Morris with me this morning, and this is a man who inspires me. This is a man who I've known now for a decade, and this is a man, if you've been around for a little while, the way I got connected to Rob Morris was we made the crazy decision a while ago to give away our entire Easter offering one year, and I was trying to figure out with our lay leadership and our staff, how do we get involved in this issue of injustice? And so somebody that I trusted connected me to this organization called Love 146, and so the first time Rob Morris and I got to know each other was when we handed him a check for $50,000 from a church in Tomball, Texas that he had never met before in his life. So there you go, Rob
shocking.
Morris.
That was absolutely shocking. Thank you. Yep.
I am so grateful to have Rob with me this morning. Rob, we are right in the middle of an Advent season in which we've given it the theme Restore. And last week we were talking about the whole idea of restoring peace. This week we're talking about restoring hope. And as we think in terms of hope, I thought to myself, there's probably not a better softball down the middle of the plate for you and me to talk about in the world in which you live and breathe every day than the whole issue of restored hope. As a matter of fact, you're the guy that introduced me to a phrase that goes before that, and you talk about this whole idea of defiant hope. Tell me a little bit about that, Rob.
Yeah, I think I often think about how many times I've heard the word defiant when I was growing up, and it was mostly in the negative connotation. You're such a defiant young person. But when you attach that to something like hope, there's an intentionality and action that's connected to it. Unlike optimism, that tends to be a bit passive in that, hey, everything's going to be okay. Hope is like, yeah, things are really bad, but I insist that it can change, and potentially because of my action.
Yeah. I remember a couple of years ago you did a message with me, and you were talking about that story of the starfish, where these starfish are all over the beach, and made a difference for that one, and that's kind of where the story typically ends. And for you, it was this moment of saying, I think we got to go a little bit further, right? Yeah. Your bigger question was,
why is there only one kid on that beach picking up starfish?
Yes, like where are the rest of the people making a difference in this hopeless deal for these starfish? Yes, we made a difference for that, but if there were more people on the beach, right, more starfish would be saved. And that's some of the defiant hope, this situation that we wrestled through. You've got a passage that you and I have talked about from the book of Proverbs, and it says this. It says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life. And I think as you and I have wrestled through this whole issue of hope, sometimes the challenge for us is just wrestling through, like, hope by nature and by definition means that it hasn't happened yet. It's sort of this faith-hope issue. And the struggle is we live in this world that wants things like right now, Rob. And so as you work in this issue of sexual exploitation of children and human trafficking and just wrestling through that, how do you, first of all, remain encouraged? And how, when you think about hope deferred, do you stay in this? I mean, you're celebrating 20 years of being in this fight.
Yeah, I was just asked recently in an interview, somebody asked, they said, do you ever feel like giving up? And I was like, every day. But the reality is you make a choice every day. And so the staying in it piece is the hard part. I mean, we love to skip to the longing fulfilled part of that passage of scripture, right? We want, and especially the culture that we live in, we like instant things, right? We want to see, hey, the thing that I'm longing for and aching for, I want to see that happen today. I want to see the fulfillment of that happen today or tomorrow, the latest. But oftentimes we don't get to see for a very long time, sometimes ever, the thing that we long for and ache for. Just this morning I was reading, there's a great passage in the Psalm 40, verse 1, and the psalmist basically just says, I waited and waited and waited for God. I mean, to me it's so interesting. He could have just said, I waited for God, right? Yeah. But you could feel the longing and the ache, right? I waited and I waited and I waited. And I think that just like amplifies what we're talking about here, that oftentimes hope feels like it's deferred. It's something that's put off, and what we do during that waiting while we long for the thing to be fulfilled really is what matters and what counts.
Yeah, that's the challenge. That's the tension we live in this life. You and I have talked a little bit about being leaders, and I walk with people in brokenness for sure, and you walk every day in a level of brokenness that a number of our folks in this room probably have never experienced or even seen. And getting the privilege of traveling with you, Rob, that was, consider that a privilege in my life. And you wind up in the spot where you kind of wrestle through this challenge of how do you live in that tension but continue to hang on to the hope that we know that is ours in Jesus? You were sharing with me this quote from the book Don Quixote by Cervantes, and I love this quote. It says, "When life itself seems lunatic, who knows where madness lies? Maybe the greatest madness is to see life only as it is and not as it should be."
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the main thing that anchors me in a defiant hope is obviously my faith. The other thing is recognizing too that I'm not in it alone, and that's why even like what Salem has done in partnering with us in such a significant and meaningful way is that recognition is like, hey, this is not a fight we're in alone. But this thing here, I think oftentimes, I mean, we've had people say, and people have said it to me, they said, don't you think that what your goal is, the end of child trafficking, is a bit naive or idealistic?
Sure.
And I'm like, no, I think it's audacious, but at the end of the day, it's people of audacity that change the world, right? And so I love the story. I'm sure some of you know the story of Don Quixote, and he was considered mad and crazy because he saw things that other people couldn't see. And oftentimes we get stuck, especially when they're in the mess of it all, of just seeing life as it is. And oftentimes life as it is horrific. And it's really hard, and it's really messy. But being able to know that that's not the whole story, and that's not where the story ends, but seeing life as it is, and being able to look forward. A couple of years ago, I was in our safe home in the Philippines, and we have a farm as part of the safe home property, where we have animals, we have crops that actually feed the folks in the safe home. And I arrived at the safe home, and one of the younger girls, a 5-year-old in our care, just sit with that for a minute, comes running up to me and she grabs me by the hand. She wants to show me that the goats on our property and the farm just had baby goats, and she really wanted me to see the baby goats. And I don't know if you've ever seen baby goats. If you put in YouTube just the search baby goats, there's millions of videos of baby goats because they are very, very funny. So she grabs me by the hand, we run down to the farm, and sure enough, here's all these baby goats jumping around, boinging up and down, doing the antics of what baby goats do. And she is laughing hysterically. I mean, just laughing hysterically. And I can't help but laugh hysterically at not only the goats, but this little girl holding my hand laughing hysterically, until I started paying attention to the size of the hand that was holding mine. And hit with the suddenness and the reality of, man, there shouldn't have to be a place called a safe home for 5-year-old children because of what has happened to them, right? And that's the madness of life as it is, the craziness and the darkness of life as it is. But then at the same time, right in that same moment, there's this laughter and giggling the way life was meant to be, and living in that tension has been an interesting journey, but it's a tension at the end of the day that we all live in, and what we do there matters.
Yeah. I remember when I was in the safe home and you gave me the privilege of being able to go in and meet those girls, and I got this opportunity to be able to play volleyball with these girls. We don't need to talk about how that went, Rob. We'll just leave it at that, right? But
they're better volleyball players, we'll just say that.
Okay. Volleyball is not my greatest sport in life. Let's leave it to other things. But just had a great time, and here's these girls playing volleyball with this crazy pastor from Tomball, Texas, of all places, and just the smiles and the laughter of that. But then you almost had to partition your brain, right, to be able to go, at the same time as I'm doing this, I'm realizing that every girl that's playing volleyball with me has a horrific story, and that's why they're there. And so you live in that. There was this other author that you had given me, and I want to put this up here. So hope is not a lottery ticket that you can sit on a sofa and clutch feeling lucky. Hope is an axe that breaks down doors within an emergency. Hope should shove you out the door. Hope calls for action. Action is impossible without hope. I love that statement. And then it ends with this, Rob. It says, anything could happen, and whether we act or not has everything to do with it. Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about Rebecca.
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca is a great author and an activist, and I think she sums up what we're talking about here, right? That hope is not passive. There is action connected to it, right? There's an intentionality behind that. There's an insistence, I love that word, there's an insistence that what we're seeing right now, that the hard thing that we're looking at, the hard thing that we're experiencing is, again, not the end of the story. I insist that the story can change, and it can potentially change because of my action. So I love that hope is an axe that breaks down.
That breaks down doors.
Right, there's intentionality, there's action connected to it. It's not just sitting around like, wow, I hope things are going to work out. That's not what we're talking about here.
Because we do. I mean, really, we do hope that things change, but we also know that God has called us to be a part of that change. We just finished saying the Lord's Prayer, and I find as I pray these days, I think about different things, and we just prayed a prayer that said, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven.
Yeah.
And part of what I believe we're called to be as Christ followers in this world, and as the church on the move, is we're called to be difference makers. You heard me say this phrase, and you told Tim you got to say that one. So this is a phrase that I've come to say. There's no such thing as an unsent Christian. It's just not, right? I mean, you were shared with me as you and I were bantering, just having a good time about this. As you think about the way Jesus operated, you said, Tim, think about what Jesus would say to people.
Yeah, I mean, I love that when he taught us to pray, when he says, I'm going to teach you how to pray, and he says, this is part of what that looks like. Pray that the kingdom of God, as it is in heaven, would come to earth. But he didn't leave it at that, right? Through the rest of the Gospels, you see Jesus saying, now you be part of bringing it, right? So he would tell stories like the parable of the Good Samaritan, and you would hear these stories, and he would say, okay, now that was a great story, right? But it's not enough just to be like, wow, that was a great story, great illustration, great analogy. He then says, now you go and do likewise, right? You be part of bringing the kingdom. Don't just leave it like, God, I hope God's in control, it's all going to work out. No, he then turns it back to us and says, now I want you to be the carriers of this kingdom. Do you really believe what, as Colossians says, the mystery of the gospel is Christ in you? Then you have a responsibility then to carry Christ. And that's what the kingdom on earth looks like.
Yeah. It's kind of some of the power of what we celebrate at this time of year, right?
Yeah.
So Romans chapter 8 says this. Sort of reminds me a little bit of faith, and you think of Hebrews 11:1, it says, now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. And then the rest of Hebrews 11 starts to unpack all these people who operated by faith. Remember this person, remember this person. And then at the end of it, Rob, it talks a bit about this idea of most of those people, quite frankly, all of them, when you think about the big deal that we celebrate at this time of year, none of them got to see the fulfillment. None of them. Yeah. And so they hung on to the promise and this hope. And so the Apostle Paul says this, but hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, this is the critical piece. We wait for it patiently. You and I were joking about the fact that people say a lot of things about you and me. But probably the thing they're not going to say about the two of us is that we're the most patient people on planet Earth. So what does that do for you as a leader that's in this thing that, your greatest day would be if you'd be out of a job?
Exactly. Yep. I think, I almost put the word perseverance in that same place of patience, right? Because being patient involves perseverance, right? It's the not giving up thing. And I mean, we've had conversations so much internally about the work that we do and what it takes, and patience and perseverance is so key. I remember talking with somebody one time, and they were like, we were talking about how, man, sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And then even as running a charity like Love 146, there's this mistaken thought of like, wow, people just want to hear about the victories, triumphs, successes, and fairy tale endings. But a lot of times that's not real life or what it looks like. And I remember this colleague of mine, she says, maybe our story as Love 146 is not just the story of victories, triumphs, successes, and fairy tale endings. Maybe our story is the story of never giving up. Maybe it's a story of perseverance. And here's the crazy, beautiful thing. Anything I know about perseverance, I'm learning from children in our care who choose to live another day, right? Anything I'm learning about defiant hope, I'm learning from children who we work with, who are aggressively taking their lives and their childhoods back day in and day out, and we get to be witnesses of that, and we can journey with them alongside of that, but they're doing the hard work. They're the heroes, not us. But that involves patience and perseverance. The word severe, first time in my life I ever saw the word severe in the word perseverance. And perseverance only makes sense within the context of the severity of the circumstances, the deferred hope aspect of our lives. You never hear someone that's doing great saying, really persevering, right? It's always the person that's in the mess of it all that's like, this is about perseverance now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're at the mountaintop, that's just not where you don't tend to grow in that moment.
Yeah.
And it's also why I think that the more I live life, the more I realize you don't get to stay at the top of the mountain very long, because God is growing us and honing us and stretching us, teaching us when we're in those valleys and in those challenges.
Love that.
Tell me a little bit about this next quote. You're going to win the award. I tried to pare this thing down, Salem, but as I kept reading this and as Rob and I kept going back and forth, this next quote is going to take 7 screens. So you may want to just start taking snapshots or go back and watch this later. This is going to go down as the longest quote ever, but tell me a little bit about this, because when I tried to pare it down, it is one of the most meaty things I've read in a long time, because it deals with the issue that we live with, this tension of the now, not yet.
Yeah, he sums up a lot of what we're talking about here really, really well. And I read a lot about hope, and I glean from people who've been down the path already, and what have you learned along the way on the journey. And this is Václav Havel, who was the former president of Czechoslovakia. He actually then became a poet, an author, a playwright, and all of this. And this is what he said about hope. And what's interesting was that he was not a follower of Jesus. He was not a believer. But you'll see here in this quote, he recognizes that hope, yeah, it's an internal thing, but there's something else. And he can't quite identify it, but he knows instinctively where it's coming from.
Yeah, he even throws out, you'll see, I wonder if maybe those Christians got something. So here's what he says. The kind of hope I often think about, especially in situations that are particularly hopeless. And when you think about what we're talking about this morning and the work that Rob and Love 146 is in, I mean, this can feel like hopeless stuff. Such as I understand all as a state of mind, not a state of the world. Either we have hope within us or we don't. Hope is not prognostication. It is an orientation of the spirit, an orientation of the heart. It transcends the world that is immediately experienced and is anchored, think about this, anchored somewhere beyond its horizons. Think about that. So as people of faith, we already know where our hope comes from. And we talk about this idea of restored hope. What I want us to wrestle through is the reason that we can be people of hope. You hear me say that all the time. The thing that separates us from the rest of the world isn't the fact that we are different from the rest of the world, that we experience different things. It's that we are people of hope. We're people of hope. Why? Because we know that our hope comes from beyond ourselves. And he says, I feel that its deepest roots are in the transcendental. Just as the roots of human responsibility are, though of course I can't, unlike Christians, for instance, say anything about the transcendental, right? You just said that the reason you stay in the fight, Rob, the number one reason is your faith. Because it grabs hold of the thing that gives us hope. So listen further. Hope in this deep and powerful sense is not the same as joy that things are going well, or willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather the ability to work for something because it is good, not just because it stands a chance to succeed. This is so countercultural for us.
Yeah.
The more unpromising the situation in which we demonstrate hope, the deeper the hope is. That's what you do, Rob. The depth of what you pour hope into reminds you the ability to have defiant hope. Hope is not the same thing as optimism. We just said that. It's not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. In short, I think that the deepest and most important form of hope, the only one that can keep us above water and urge us to good works, which God calls us to in Ephesians, and the only true source of breathtaking dimension of the human spirit and its efforts is something we get, as it were, from
Elsewhere.
elsewhere.
The quotes are great. Elsewhere.
Yeah, and he can't define it. But that's what makes us different. It is also this hope, above all, that gives us the strength to live and continually to try new things, even in conditions that seem as hopeless as ours do, here and now. I just love his willingness to say, our hope is tied to something beyond our horizon.
And I mean, as followers of Jesus, elsewhere has a name, right? I mean, that's what we know his name.
Jesus. Yeah. Salem, I want to close with this thought. Glimmer. I think in terms of the concept of hope, we talked in this particular quote that the idea of what makes hope so powerful is that the deeper the sense of hopelessness, the greater the sense of hope. And so the deeper the depth of darkness, the more a simple glimmer pierces the darkness. And so I found myself, as Rob and I were talking, thinking about this. In Isaiah 9, I want you to hang on to this thought. The people that were walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Rob, you've dedicated your life to be able to bring a glimmer. And as we think about the candles that are being lit that tell us that we're getting closer and closer to the incarnation, that moment where God stopped at nothing, including putting himself here. But these people, I mean, we're talking 1,000 years before Jesus showed up, and then we were kind of laughing a little bit about that. Then Jesus shows up as
a glimmer.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you think of all the ways that God could have shown up in the big show, right? The big, explosive, sort of tons of light in the darkness. Instead, I mean, and I love this time of the year because what incarnation is that glimmer. God shows up in a glimmer. And it's why so many people missed it and continue to miss it, because oftentimes we miss the glimmer because it's just a glimmer. But if we're attentive and if we're watching carefully, we can see the glimmer. And to show up as an incredible vulnerability as a baby in a stable full of a bunch of cows and just smells and all. Talk about just a glimmer. God works in the glimmer. I mean, I guess the bottom line question, right, for us is always like, is the glimmer enough? Or are we going to waste so much time looking for the big show and we miss it when it's there right in front of us, but it's just a glimmer?
Which goes back to the being present in the moment.
Yes.
That God is present.
Yep.
He's here
now.
Friends, he's here in whatever's going on in your lives. He gives you hope because the glimmer came. And 30 years later, think about that. 30 plus years later, he winds up on a cross, walks out of a tomb, and promises that he's here with us. And that is what restores our hope.
Yeah.
Rob, thanks for being a guy that continues to restore hope. He's given 20 years of your life and continues to give your life to this issue.
Thank you.
Let's pray.
Thank you.
Father God, we thank and praise you for the privilege of being able to gather together this morning. We thank you for the reminder that though each one of us has our own story that has darkness in it, the thing that sets us apart from the rest of the world isn't the fact that we don't struggle and that we don't have challenges. What sets us apart from the rest of the world is that we don't have to ask the question, I wonder where our hope comes from. For we know that our hope comes from you. That's it. This time of year for us, as we think about restoration and as we think about hope, it's this reminder to us that a baby born in Bethlehem, vulnerable and a glimmer, changed the world. God, I thank you for people like Rob who invests his life in being able to make a difference in the lives of children. I thank you for this church that gives time and resources to be able to be a part of that and to put more people on the beach, throwing those starfish back in the water and making a difference for that one. And though, God, the size and scope of the problem can sometimes feel hopeless, it's in that moment that we remind ourselves where our hope comes from and just how big you are. And so, God, we continue to pray the prayer, may your kingdom come. But may we not be unsent Christians, but may we be a part of what you're doing in this world. God, continue to bless Rob and his leadership. Continue to bless Love 146. Continue to bless those children as you continue to bring them that glimmer of hope. These things we ask in your precious and holy name. Amen. Can we thank God for this man? Appreciate you. Thank you. Appreciate you.